Hello everybody. This video is picking up where we left last lesson. I'm recording it specifically for my Year 12 history group. We began this lesson yesterday, which is about the events of November 1918 through to the early spring of 1919. The beginning of what will become the Weimar Republic. Okay, so you're looking at the slideshow that we had in yesterday's lesson. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the way the video works, it does actually start at the very beginning of the slideshow. So I'll just quickly scroll through to where we left off in yesterday's lesson. So we knowledge test, which is there. There's the personal learning checklist. Flip learning, prepare, reading from Carr, and in particular Stephen Lee. I'll come back to that one in a few minutes because that does link to where we're going to be picking up from today. Reminder about the knowledge and the independent reading and keeping a record of that, and actually make sure you do more than just read and highlight. You've got to be pulling points out. But I'll pick that up in the meetings with you individually, and that's what we did the previous lesson. Just the pulling together of the in a nutshell. And again, a reminder of the importance of the absolutely crucial. Underpins everything, and it will continue to do so for the rest of the course, is know your political spectrum, know your political parties. You've really got to have that at your fingertips. That's the basis of it. If there's any area, any aspect of it you don't know or understand, you must speak to me, because you've got to have that secure. So we did a little knowledge recall. There were the answers to it, placing the parties in the spectrum, and then we began the lesson, and what we covered yesterday is we recovered the Declaration, the Ebergruner Pact, the Stinners-Legian Agreement, the Freikorps, and the Spartacists. Those are the areas we covered. So, key questions to test your understanding in and out the Declaration of the Republic. In a nutshell, the Ebergruner Pact, plus the details. In a nutshell, the Stinners-Legian Agreement, plus the details. In a nutshell, the Freikorps, plus the details. And in a nutshell, the failed Spartacist uprising of January 1919 and the failed other left-wing uprisings that followed in the spring of 1919, plus the details. The details are important. Hopefully you're mapping those onto the mind map. Okay, so the focus is very much on the in a nutshell. That's the core understanding, but the details you've got to pick up, map them and know them. The dates, the statistics, etc., are what you've got to have at your fingertips. So that's where we reached by the end of the lesson yesterday. So the strand that we now need to pick up is that one there. Okay, the debate. Were these events, can they be classified as a revolution? So, here we are. Okay. There are our key questions. Okay, so this is kind of like the test for yourself of your knowledge and understanding. So be thinking about this. Could you argue a case that the events of 1918 to 1919 were revolutionary? And what's the counter-argument that historians might use that the events were not revolutionary? And why is there a controversy amongst historians about Hébert's role in these events? So we're on that strand. Was it a revolution? And in a nutshell, these are the key points. Sorry if you hear me sniffing, I've got a bit of a cold. So in a nutshell, so in the 100 years since these highly significant events, so because these events began in 1917 to 18, and we're now, as I record this, in the year 2020, so 100 years have passed. And over that 100-year period, this period has been written about by historians. And historians have often described the events in Germany as a revolution, those events of 1918 to 1919. Okay? So if you pick up history books written over the last 100 years, you will often find a chapter calls it the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919. Now, many historians now, 100 years later, are quite critical of that. They say that is actually far too simplistic, calling these events a revolution. Okay? And that's where you come in, okay? Because you could be asked this question in the exam. Okay, so it is a common question. To what extent could the events of 1918 to 1919 be described as a revolution, for example? That's a typical question. Okay, so you need to engage with that debate. And the thing is, it is a debate, so there are arguments both ways. Okay, so in some ways, the events were revolutionary. Okay, so what are the arguments? Okay. And the starting point, we'll come on to this the next slide in a minute, but in some ways, the real starting point is to have in your mind a clear definition of what does the word revolution mean. Now, the word revolution can mean lots of different things, okay? You can have political revolutions, you can have social revolutions, etc. But at the core, the word revolution means a significant change with far-reaching consequences. Okay, so something significant in history has happened that is a significant change. As opposed to other words that historians use, continuity. Continuity means very little change, that things are continuing as they did before. Okay, another word that historians use is counter-revolution. That's a reverse change. That's where things went back to the way they were before. Counter-revolution. Another word for counter-revolution is reactionary. Reactionary. That's a good word, okay, for you to be aware of. If you are reactionary, it is kind of like a sort of reverse revolution. Reactionaries are people who try to turn the clock back and put it back the way it used to be. Okay, so and we'll pick up that word as we go through. But here we're talking about the word revolution, a significant change. Okay, now, so in some ways here the events were revolutionary. So there's an argument for that. Okay, what's the argument? Okay, well, the monarchy has come to an end. The Kaiser has abdicated, and it's not just the Kaiser. The separate princes and monarchs of the other German states, the sort of King of Bavaria and the Duke of Saxony and the Grand Duke of Mecklenburg, etc. Well, they've all gone. Okay, remember, it wasn't just the top monarch, the Kaiser, the Emperor, who abdicated. The end of the war resulted in all the monarchs abdicating their responsibility. Okay, that's a huge change. Okay, because those monarchs had been there not just since 1871, but before 1871. Germany was now a republic. Okay, well, as we just talked about earlier in the lesson, it's been declared to be a republic. Okay, is it officially a republic? Well, actually, we have to wait till the January 1919 Constituent Assembly makes that decision, and it did meet, and it did decide that Germany was going to be a republic. And that's a big change. Okay, so it means the head of state is now an elected person, a president. So that's arguably a revolutionary change. Okay, because what this basically means now is real power, moving into the future, is from the bottom up. And again, that's a useful phrase to use. Bottom up means that the ordinary people hold the power now through the Reichstag, which is the elected parliament, the elected representative of the ordinary people. Huge change. We began the course in 1871, and we said that in spite of the fact there was a Reichstag that was created, bottom line beneath it all, accountability was top down. Okay, so the Chancellor had to give account to the President, so real power lay at the top. Now that has changed. Okay, so that's one argument. Now the counter argument, the opposite argument, is that this was not a real revolution. Okay, because if you actually look at it beneath the surface, much had not changed. There's that word, not changed. The key word there is continuity. Okay, so you've got to be using these words as A-level historians when you write about this. Continuity means much that had been before continued. So arguably, although there was significant change, should you really call this a revolution? There's a strong argument that the term revolution is misleading. So what's the evidence? Okay, well, if you compare the events in Germany 1918 to 1919 in comparison to Russia 1917, the extreme left wing, the communists who took power in Russia, well, that did not happen in Germany. Okay, the German communists were crushed. The Spartacists were put down. And of course, what the communists wanted to happen in Germany was to give power to the workers' councils, as had happened in Russia a year earlier, and create a communist state. Well, that didn't happen. The Soviets did not take power. They were crushed. So, in fact, what had happened, as we know, is Chancellor Weber, who, although he was left-wing, he was a moderate left-wing, so the man who was in charge of running the country, made a deal with the old order, with the old Prussian elites, the established powers of the old Germany, the Second Reich. And strictly speaking, the Second Reich has come to an end. The Second German Empire ended with the abdication of the Kaiser. But did it? The argument is, of course, that beneath the surface, the Second Reich continued into the new republic because the old order are now going to retain a huge influence in the new Germany, keeping their jobs in very significant areas: the army, the civil service, the judiciary, and education. So although on the surface the Kaiser and the monarchs have gone and the country is being run by the Reichstag, beneath the surface you've got the old machinery that ran the old empire that, strictly speaking, has now ended, but the machinery is still there and it is being used to run the new republic. So you've got to be able to articulate that point in an exam, and that's a powerful counter-argument. In a sense, some historians have said that to call the new German Republic, to call it a republic, is misleading. They say it was really the old empire dressed up as a republic. Okay, so there's our sort of like, in an essence, the debate about this powerful topic about was it a German revolution. Now, you could get a whole essay question in the exam on this. It is probably, to be honest, if you get a depth study 2 question in section B, this is the most likely type of essay question. So you've got to be able to articulate the arguments there. And the best way to approach this is, as I've done there in the nutshell, is you've got an argument for, and then an argument against. Okay, but you've got to be able to develop that into 4 sides of writing. Okay, so moving on. In a sense, the notes do that. This is a great opportunity, though, to refer you to this hugely important essay, the second essay in the first chapter of Stephen Lee's book, The Weimar Republic. Now, that second essay is called Was There a German Revolution, 1918 to 1919? And he works his way chronologically. He starts actually with the October Reform, Prince Max and the October Reform movement. And he then moves into the abdication of the Kaiser, and he then moves into Hebert taking power, and he then moves into the January Spartacist uprising, and then he looks at Hebert's policies in the first half of 1919. And for each of those chronological blocks of time, he analyses, he considers, were these events a revolution? So he starts with the October Reform, and he looks at the arguments. You could argue this was a revolution, and he looks at the counter-arguments that the October Reform was not a revolution. Then he moves into the events of the Kiel Mutiny and the abdication of the Kaiser, and he does exactly the same. He looks at the arguments for and against. Were these events revolutionary? Okay, so it's a really excellent essay, and I would honestly say that if you know that essay inside out, you will be very, very well prepared for what is the most likely question on the examination if the second depth study appears. And that is why you've got access to my notes for that particular question, okay, for that essay, but also the YouTube video in which I walk and talk you through the Stephen J. Lee essay. So I'm not going to do that again now. There's a separate YouTube video where you've got my commentary. So I'll put onto the Padlet page not only the scanned essay, but I'll also put my notes to that essay. But most importantly, the YouTube video. Play that. It's only 19 minutes long. But before you play the YouTube video, it is really crucial you read the original essay. Don't just rely on my notes and my YouTube commentary. You've got to read the essay because you're learning about the style, how to write persuasively as a historian, and that's so important. So that's that. So in terms of where is the YouTube video, because obviously you're watching a YouTube video and you can't hyperlink, not that I know of, within YouTube. So the location that, go obviously to the homepage of my channel and click on playlists, and then go to the Germany 1914 to 1919 playlist there. And as you can see, currently at the moment of recording this, there are 32 videos in that particular playlist. Go to that playlist, and within that, and you'll see that, okay, and within the list of videos, which are on the right inside the playlist, you will see that one. Was there a German Revolution? And as you can see, it's 18 minutes and 44 seconds long. So click on that link, and it'll take you to the video where you can see the first page of my notes there, and I walk and talk you through the key points. And as you can see from my notes, that what Stephen Lee does is he begins with a definition of revolution, and then he works his way through the events, arguing for and against. Okay, so the Stephen J. Lee is the main thing. So there is Stephen J. Lee's definition of revolution, and this is why it's got to be quite refined. You can't sort of like approach A-level with a simplistic definition of revolution that you might get at GCSE. You've got to have a pretty refined, and the Stephen J. Lee is a useful starting point for you. Okay, so there it is. Stephen J. Lee would argue, you define revolution, first of all, there was a transfer of power. Okay, And usually that transfer of power happens outside normal constitutional process. So, for example, take Britain today. You have a general election, and let's say the Conservative Party have been running the government. There's a general election, and the Labour Party were to win the general election. Power would transfer from the Conservative Party to the Labour Party. Well, that is within a constitutional process, so therefore that would not fit the definition of a revolution. So that's what Stephen J. Lee is saying, is that there's a transfer of power, but it is happening outside the constitutional process. Secondly, that the changes that happen as a result of that transfer of power, it changes not just the government, but it changes the infrastructure. So it's not just the top level, it's not just a change in the cabinet in terms of a different political parties running the country. It brings about a significant change in the way in which the country is being run. So a significant change, for example, with regards to the civil service and the educational system. So already you're probably thinking, well, actually, on that particular basis, was this really a German Revolution? Because the infrastructure did not change, did it? The civil service didn't really change. The judiciary didn't really change. So, we're starting to come up with ideas. And the third aspect, Lee says, is that the process of revolution is often, not always, but it's often accelerated by war. So a genuine revolution, more often than not, war is the accelerator. Not necessarily the cause, but war is the accelerator that brings about the change. So if you think about what we're talking about here, this sort of like the end of the monarchy and the creation of a republic, you could argue, yes, well, that certainly seems to fit. World War I accelerated the process that brought about the end of the German monarchy. And you could also argue that the change that happened outside normal constitutional process. The declaration of the Republic was largely because of the influence of the mob, as we saw Scheidemann making a declaration. The decision was made outside the Constituent Assembly hadn't actually met, for example, to make that decision. So the influence of the mob on the streets and the fear of a violent change is what brought about the beginning of the Republic. That one is more problematic. Did it really bring about a radical change to the political infrastructure? So you see straight away, if you've got a clear definition of revolution, you've kind of got a basis for your essay, plenty to talk about. So the key points then in the notes, as with the lessons, I don't need to read through these with you. You can have a quick look yourself. But this is what you need to map onto the mind map. So think about those points, and in particular the bits that are marked in bold. So the arguments on one level that the events were revolutionary. What are the arguments? So there's the abdication. That's a significant change. The Second Reich has gone, replaced by a republic. You could argue that the Stinners-Legian Agreement was a significant change for the working classes. But then here you've got the counter-argument. Were these events really revolutionary? So the socialist revolution, I'll put that in, that the social revolution, in other words, giving power to the workers, of course, never happened. The Spartacists were crushed, the Soviets were crushed. Power was not given to the working classes, the middle classes remained. So that's the point. Soviets were playing no real further role. Arguably, what happened with the birth of the Weimar Republic was continuity, because the October reforms, the decision to give power to the Reichstag had happened before the Spartacist uprising. So arguably that is continuity. Critically, the military leadership was unreformed, still dominated by the elites. And it wasn't remembered just the military leadership, okay? That the civil service was unchanged. And that's the apparatus that implements the law. The civil service is the police force, it's the government officers, the departments, the ministries, the Foreign Office. All of those were pretty much the same people had the top jobs. The lawyers, the judiciary, the lawyers and the judges throughout Germany, unchanged on the whole. And of course, education, German high schools, top levels, the head teachers, the universities, the deans of faculties were largely the same people. And most of these people were right-wing. Okay, they were from the old order. They were men, largely, born into often Prussian established families. So it's like the Second Reich is continuing through into the new Germany. So there's your revolution versus arguments against the revolution. Okay. Another one. Hebert could at best only rely on lukewarm support from the army for the new republic in future years. That's a sort of significant point, because what we're saying is, if the establishment, the civil service and the judiciary, etc., and the army is dominated by the old elites from the Second Reich, then the leaders of this new republic, who are moderate left like Hebert, if the republic is going to work, they are reliant on the support of the establishment, the civil service, etc. Because it's their job to implement the laws in this new Germany. But the people who are filling those jobs are only going to give lukewarm support for the republic, because at heart these men are believers in the Second Reich. They are from the political right side of things. Okay, so we've already established that Hebert was forced into that very difficult position where he became dependent on the old order to crush the radical left. And that's the point. So that's a sort of key point. Just read that. Hebert could therefore at best only rely on lukewarm support from the army for the new republic in future years. At worst, and critically, now that the army leadership had crushed the radical left, in other words, the Spartacist uprising, the army leadership have got the power and the influence now to turn their anger on the new German republican system. And that's going to fundamentally weaken the new republic. And even more critically, Hebert, in crushing the Spartacists, was reliant on the Freikorps to defend democracy. And yet the Freikorps at heart were anti-democratic. Okay, so that's all relevant. Think about how you can fit those arguments into the debate about revolutionary change. Okay, so it tends to fit more into the counter-revolution, doesn't it? Because what we're saying here is that the new system, the new republic, which was a significant break with the past, is being held up by forces that despise the new system and want to bring about the old system, bring back the old system. Okay, so counter-revolutionaries are therefore in a very strong position. And remember, we often call these people, the old order, the forces of reaction. Reaction means they want to turn the clock back. Okay, they had their way. They would actually like to get rid of Hebert and bring the old republic, the old empire back. So these forces are the reactionaries. So this is why the Eber-Gruner Pact is so important. So there's a historical controversy here about Eber's role. Arguably, he did what was necessary to ensure stability and order. The Eber-Gruner Pact was necessary. Many historians defend Eber, said he had no choice. On the other hand, there are some historians who are not very defensive of Eber. What they actually say is that when he agreed the Eber-Gruner Pact, he overreacted. So he phoned up Gruner and said, "I need your help to crush the communists because they're about to copy what the Bolsheviks did in Russia and they're about to try and seize power." And of course, arguably, that did happen because the Spartacists did try to seize power in the capital city, Berlin, in January 1919. But there's quite a convincing argument, which you'll pick up in Lee, is that threat was non-existent because the Spartacists were disorganised. Do you remember we said yesterday that Liebknecht and Luxemburg argued with each other? They couldn't decide whether to try to take power with a violent takeover in Berlin would work or not. And it didn't work. Okay, they were easily defeated because they were disorganised. But it wasn't just poor organisation. Remember, to actually really get power, they needed to get influence in the Soviets, and there were lots of these workers' councils dotted around. But most of the Soviets were not really very revolutionary. They were ordinary workers who were confused, who simply wanted to end the war and feed their families. But many of these workers in the Soviets didn't really know what they wanted. They were not educated in political matters. So the Spartacists were trying to get influence in those Soviets, but they hadn't really got that influence. So these are all arguments that actually there wasn't really much of a threat. So when Eber picked up the phone and called Gruner and said to Gruner, "Get back, end the war, get your soldiers back, I need your help," he gave power to the old order through this pact. And arguably, did he really need to do that? Okay, because the extreme left were not that well organised and they were not that strong, is the argument. Okay, and the final point there is it could also be argued that he was a traitor to socialism, which his party claimed to represent, because of course he made a deal with the right-wing forces, and many socialists were very critical of Eber there. So interesting and useful arguments that you can incorporate into the debate. So that's the finished picture. Okay, so I've just added that strand there to our overview. There is a document. So that's just really a reminder. We haven't been focusing in on that, but there's a useful document, which is Liebknecht's speech at a meeting of the majority SPD with the independent SPD on the 10th of November 1918. So as you read that speech, it's on the back of the notes. And then there are some questions that I've written for you to think about it. Okay, what does Liebknecht mean when he says the counter-revolution is already on the march? And who are the counter-revolutionaries? So hopefully already, even without reading the document, you've got an idea what the answer to that question is. Okay, so Liebknecht is very aware of, on the 10th of November, of the Eber-Gruner Pact. He's saying the counter-revolution is on the march. It means Gruner is on his way back from the front. The Freikorps are on their way back to put us down. Okay, so that's who he's talking about. What insidious methods does Liebknecht claim that the counter-revolutionaries are using? So read that document. Okay, so what treacherous, deceitful methods are the Freikorps and Gruner and the old order, the forces of counter-revolution using against him? And if you read the speech, there are lots of interruptions. Okay, what do the interruptions of those listening to Liebknecht's speech reveal about the left wing of German politics? So think about the language, think about the hidden messages of the source, and then put those onto your mind map. okay? Because you do need to be reading these sources that are scattered throughout the course, because Section A is a source-based study, okay? So you've got to be reading, highlighting, making annotated notes around the edge of the sources. And there is the source, okay? So consider those questions, highlight, underline, and make notes around the edge as part of the follow-up to this lesson. So when I see you next, which will be, I think, Monday, we will move into the next topic, which is the birth of the Weimar Republic. Okay, and so yes, we'll get on to the Constituent Assembly that met on the 12th of January. We'll talk about the way in which the new republic was divided. We'll talk about the opening of the Constituent Assembly, the economic problems that the new republic faced in the first 6 months in particular, following the end of the war, and then the eventual Treaty of Versailles of the 28th of June 1919. Now, really importantly, I'll only touch upon the Treaty of Versailles. The assumption is you know this from GCSE. Okay, so go back through your GCSE notes. Make sure you're clear about what the key terms were of the Treaty of Versailles. And then the debate. The type of question you can get in the exam, what were the strengths and weaknesses of the new republic, and balance those against each other. Okay, so there you go. That finishes this particular lesson, which apologies again, I couldn't be in school this week to teach that lesson. But obviously, if there's any issues or questions, do let me know, and I'll very happy to give time to talk you through that individually. But hopefully that was useful for you. Thank you very much.